Hi everybody. Today we're going to paint a reindeer. I've sent you a couple of pictures. If you want to do a herd of reindeer, then go ahead. I'm just going to do a single one, and we're going to use gouache. So if you haven't come across gouache before, gouache is a sort of bridge between watercolour and acrylic. So acrylic, once it's on the paper and it's dry, you can't remove it. Watercolour is transparent and it's water-based and it is movable, so even when it's thoroughly dry you can still lift off layers of paint. This is watercolour basically mixed with a little bit of chalk. Well, that's how it used to be mixed. These days it's a chemical, but what it does is it sends it on the matte side. So a lot of illustrators use it because watercolour is notoriously difficult to photograph. So the matte finish enables them to photograph better and use it in magazines and books and stuff like that. So it's a really popular medium for that sort of thing, illustration, design. I really like it because it gives that matte finish. I don't really like a shine on my paintings. I mean, I use acrylic a lot, mainly because I'm working so big. One of the things that's difficult in gouache is working large because it's quite difficult to get flat. However, I really do enjoy this medium. I find it very satisfying. So you can get large sets for not very much money, and it's quite a nice thing to play with. You can also mix it with watercolour and use it on watercolours for various things. We use white gouache a lot for restoring whites in watercolour. So there's a masterclass coming up in January of a wading bird with he's on a sort of surface, very shallow water with a shimmer on the surface of the water, and one of the tips that I've shared with you in that masterclass is how to restore the white shimmer on the water, and for that we use white gouache. So even if you don't get a whole set of gouache, white gouache is a really good colour to have around. Again, you could buy some individual tubes and just have a play with a couple, see if you enjoy it. So because this is a sort of illustration, I thought we'd use gouache today. Okay, I'm going to show you how to mix it. I've got a whole pot of gouache here, and this ranges from a whole load of tubes that I picked up in a pound shop, which, you know, are not great for mixing because the cheaper the colour or the cheaper the paint, the more black is in it. So what you tend to do is you tend to get sort of dull mixes of colours, but as they come out the tube they're absolutely fine, and they do mix okay actually, they're not too bad. And then I've got this Daler Rowney set, which are sort of student semi-professional range of colours, and they're really good. But you can buy like really expensive gouache as well. There's some really nice sets on the market at the moment. You'll find that most art shops sell gouache because it's quite an old paint, traditional paint, so it's been around for a while, so most art shops will sell it. I think they sell sets in the range. Okay, so I've got a palette here. It's an old palette, it's on a paper plate, and I can't remember what I used this for, but all of these colours will re-wet and rework again, so you can let them dry off and then stack them somewhere and then reuse them again. So you just need to apply water and they'll start moving again. Sometimes they need a bit of mixing because they go a bit granulated, so they do need sort of a little bit of cosseting to get going again. Otherwise use a normal palette or another paper plate or whatever. I'm not going to do a background yet. I'm going to decide whether to do a background once I've painted the reindeer. So I'm going to start with the brown, and I've got some small detail brushes here, and I've got some paper towels, and I've got some water. So I've got some brown here on this palette, so I'm just going to move all my paint tubes out of the way, and I'm going to see how it gets going. So I'm going to use the slightly larger. The reason why I've got smaller brushes is because I'm working on a small piece of paper here. It's only A5, so, you know, work with brushes that are appropriate to the size of the paper that you're working on, and obviously the detail of the work that you're doing. So we need a sort of reddy brown here, and this is a little bit of burnt umber, which comes out a bit red. I've got a piece of paper somewhere. Yeah, here. So again, I always have a little scrap test sheet, and you can see that's a bit brown. Yeah? So I'm going to use a little bit of burnt sienna. Burnt sienna is a red-brown colour. And you can see there. I only squeeze out a bit at a time, but I always find I have too much, whatever amount I squeeze out. But like I said, it doesn't matter because we're going to, you can reuse these paints. So it's not as important to be careful with your colour amounts as it is with something like acrylic. Okay. So I've got some red brown mixed into the burnt umber. I've also got this colour straight out of the tube. So if I want to use a richer tone, I can use that. I don't know whether you can see what I'm doing. I hope you can. And then I also need some white. Now I've got a patch of white here. Now it's quite dirty, which might be useful to us. Yeah. So I could use that. It's gone like a creamy colour, so that's quite nice. Okay, so you can see it reworks, so that's good. No wastage. I've got some tissue here to wipe certain colours off. Gouache tends to stain your brushes quite heavily, so make sure that you're completely clean when you wash your brushes off. Because it's a chalky based paint, it tends to bond with the brushes, the brush fibres quite well, so it needs a little bit more cleaning up than normal watercolour. Okay, so let's go in with and see what this looks like. So it's a fairly thick mix. It's a bit sort of creamy rather than watery mix. Okay, and mix it well because it's paint that's already dried off once. It just needs a little bit of manipulation. So because we're working wet on dry here, I don't need to worry about what colours I use first. You know, like traditionally in watercolour you work light to dark, so we're working in sections at a time. If I was working wet in wet or something like that, then maybe I would be a bit more considered about excuse me, about what I'm doing. But because we're working in patches, you don't really need to do that. So in with the burnt umber and burnt sienna mix, and you can see that initially, oh, by the way, I've drawn this out just in pencil, so you know, you can trace it, you can do what you want with it, you can do it bigger, smaller, you decide. It's your work. And also the other thing is, if you don't want to use gouache, or if you haven't got gouache, there's no reason why you can't do this in watercolour or in acrylic. If you're doing it in acrylic, just remember that once it's dry, it's dry. So if you make a mistake, you have to paint over it with something. Okay, so just be a little bit more cautious with how you plan the various stages of this piece. Right, so you can see that the paint is going on reasonably nicely, but you will find that some mixes are more patchy than others. So it may be that you might have to go back and just put a second coat on once it's dry. It really depends on what sort of finish you want with your work. Okay, so I'm just going to mix up a little bit more paint. So that's the first section. The under section of the tail is done here. I can just about get in here with this brush. It's a little bit rounded on the end, so just be careful with your points. I rotate the brush to try and get rid of some of the paint off the top end of the brush. So in here, oh, I've just realised I didn't plug my microphone in. Let me just stop this. I just realised that I hadn't plugged my microphone in, and my microphone on my iPhone is a bit dodgy and it's a bit buzzy, so I'm sorry if the initial first few minutes of this tutorial are a bit buzzy, but that's why. So I just plugged my microphone in, so hopefully that will solve that issue. Okay, so in with the brown again. I'm going to put a touch more red in it, red as in burnt sienna, just to change the colour ever so slightly in this section. And you can see that in this section it blends into white. So I'm just going to finish this bit up here. So I'll go around the face with a darker tone in there. Like I said, just use a brush that will get you into these little sections here, like that. Okay, and I'm going to pick up a little bit of that white colour, and I'm just going to put it, I don't know what's happening with my brush, but it's got a few hairs on it. I'm going to put it on the legs and under the belly there, like that. So this is a little bit of white, and it's got a little bit dirty with some of the brown paint that I've got on my brush. So it's an ideal colour for this deer. I thought it might be nice to do a deer because it's coming up to Christmas again. So you can see it's just blending really nicely, and I'm actually mixing the paint on the paper itself. And you can see with the addition of white, it does become less patchy. So you can see that the brown has a tendency to be patchy, but the white has not. So this is quite interesting with regard to the observation of how your colours behave. Some colours will be less opaque than others, so just be aware of that. You can always do a test piece to work out how transparent or how opaque your colours are. But I'm just pushing that up into the brown there, and it's starting to mix together. You can see that. Okay, take it right up. There we go, and into this section here as well, just so it doesn't look like it's just stopping and starting somewhere. And again, pick up a bit more white. Be careful with the white because it does tend to be really powerful. Very, very strong, especially when you're mixing stuff. Alright, so just use very small amounts of white, and you can add more if you need to, like I'm doing here, especially around this area here where it's very white. Blend it in. Sort of has a circular form there, doesn't it? Under here is quite white. That's where the joint comes in. Okay, so it takes a little bit of manipulation, but it will blend quite nicely if you want it to blend, that is. You could just do this almost like a painting by numbers, and just block in the colours, but if you wanted the blending to happen, then that's how you do it. Okay, so I've started with the white here because there's a little bit more white in that area than there is. I'm going up into the face now, into that area there. It's quite important that you have enough water on this paint as well, because it does tend to flow better if it's more liquid. Just mixing up a bit more brown, and I'm going to go into this area here now. So around the side of the neck there, it's quite brown. On top of the head is brown. We'll do the antlers separately. I'm just going to do the head for now. Take a little bit more of that red colour, because it's quite red on that forehead. And you can see it sort of comes down in patches, so if you want to keep the patches, paint them in. If you want to just paint the whole head in this red brown colour, then do that. You don't have to stick rigidly to what's going on here. Around the ears is brown, like that, and then we've got a patch coming over the eye, and then round and just sort of around the nostril, like that. And then the rest of it is pretty much white, so I'm going to go in and soften this area now here. Like that. On this area here, just soften the white into the brown, like that. Again, how much blending you do is down to you, and how the finished results turn out. I'm just going to take a bit more of that white. Just going to wipe off my brush a bit. With gouache, I tend to have a pot of water for washing off my brush, and then a pot of water for mixing colour, because the water, you'll see, becomes very cloudy very quickly. So it's useful to have two pots, minimum 2 pots on the go at once, so that you don't get these cloudy mixes happening, and change your water frequently. Okay, so in around the eye is going to be black, so you can sort of get away with painting the eye over the eye if necessary, and around this nose area as well. You know, you can get away with painting over the nose, because you're going to then pop it back in with a bit of black. So again, leave that fairly, ooh, it's a bit strong for that, but never mind, I'll put the rest of it here. Fairly patchy. I'm just going to work into these legs here. I'm just going to get rid of some of this paint off my brush, like that, so I don't waste it. I'm going to wipe off this. So have a rag and just wipe off your brush if you find that the paint is getting a little bit over dominant. I'm just going to, before I start on that leg, I'm just going to pick up a bit of this brown and just go back in and put an extra layer on this face. bit more water needed just to loosen it up a bit. But like I said, you can always let these areas dry off and go back in and put a second layer on if you feel it's a bit patchy. Okay, that's not too bad. So back into this area here. Now this area is quite stark, so you need to paint around with the white or the off-white. So it's really just like painting by numbers for this section. And same with the back leg. Like that. Bit more paint. And you can see that that has dried quite patchy, so I probably will go back in and just put second coats on some of these areas just to sort of flatten them down a bit. There we go with the tail. Now let's just put a little bit of brown here and there on this leg. So in there's a little mark. Up here, just want to separate this leg from the back leg, so just put a little bit of shadow work in there, and so on and so forth. Okay, so if I just apply, let me just put another coat on here. Let me just get this going, this brown. Just got this burnt sienna and a little bit of burnt umber coming out of this very dry paint here. I'm just going to mix up a second. I'm just going to test this and see if it's any good first. No, that's not too bad. Okay, so in we go with a second coat. You know, sometimes you might even find that you have to put a third coat on. I know it sounds ridiculous to have to do that, but that's the way it is with gouache. Just need to apply another coat sometimes, and you know, again, it depends on the type of paint that you've used as to how transparent the gouache is. So if you want it flat, you need to do that. Can you see? Oops, gone into the tail a bit there. Again, up this area here, I'm just going to put a little bit like that, just a touch, because I don't want that to be wholly flat, because it is a bit blended. Going to come down that leg though with a little bit more colour. That patch in there is not so bad, and the head needs a little bit of white in it, so I'll just pop a bit of white. Just a touch of white in with that burnt sienna colour will just give you a little bit of richness in the face and will help the face to project forward out of the composition, because the face is very lovely. I'm probably going to need to get into this really small area. I'm going to use a detailed brush so I can get in around these ears, because they're really neat I need to be neat. Okay, you can see how much easier that is getting into those areas with a detail brush than it is doing it with a, even though that brush was small, it's got quite a rounded edge to it, so just a little touch there. And I'm just going to bring down that red tone just down the neck a bit, like that, just a touch. Okay, so that's the main body done, or nearly done. I will let it dry and then assess if it needs to be fiddled with. We're going to put some colour now on the antlers. So whatever browns you've got left, just mix. Actually, I need a dark brown here, so I need to use a little bit more of this burnt umber. So I've got another detail brush here. It's got slightly thicker ends to it, and it's got a hair sticking out. Look, there we go, got rid of that. So just be careful, ideally dry this off and then start to work on your antlers. But I can't stress the importance of using fine brushes. Cut some brushes down if necessary, or go and buy yourself some for Christmas. There's another hair coming out of that, yeah. Look at that. Huge amounts. I mean, you get hairs coming out of brushes even if they're like £30 brushes, you know. It's ridiculous how badly made some of these brushes are. But it is important that you take care of your brushes. Make sure that when you wash them in lukewarm water. If you need to reshape them, you can dunk them in boiling water, just the hair part. If they've gone like this one, which is a bit, I don't know whether you can see that, it's a bit curved. You can boil some water and you just stick the hair part, don't go up into the metal part because that's where the glue is, into the boiling water, and then reshape your brush and leave it to dry flat. And I have used hair gel in the past to keep the brushes, the brush fibres flat so that they dry flat. And dry them up flat on the surface if you can. And you should do that every time you wash your brushes anyway. You can get brush cleaners, soaps and stuff, they work really nicely. You can put some conditioner on your brushes every now and again. That helps because a lot of them are natural fibres, so you know, you treat the fibres the same way as you would treat your own hair. I mean, if you've got sable brushes, you really need to take care of them because they're really expensive. But I have a range of brushes. I don't have any very expensive because I don't trust myself with them. But I have a range of brushes in my collection, from, you know, brushes I've picked up in charity shops to brushes that I've bought from professional art stores. And they all vary in how they behave. So it is a bit of a minefield, but you know, clean water, a bit of soap and dry flat is the way to go. And make sure if you're using oil that you only use those brushes for oil paints. And I do the same with my acrylics. So I have brushes for acrylics and then I have different brushes for my watercolours and gouache, because you know they do suffer if you use them for different media. And the other thing is that really you should mix your paints using some stiff brushes or even palette knives. So with acrylic you should use a palette knife to mix your colours. I rarely do that because I forget. I'm so I need to get on with work and I tend to forget to use a palette knife to mix my colours. But yeah, if you can remember to do that, then that's a great thing, because you can imagine if you're mixing like I'm doing here, look, mix like this with your brushes, then your brushes are not going to last long. So use an old acrylic brush or something like that to mix your watercolours, or even an old watercolour brush is good enough. And then use your good brushes to actually do the painting with. Again, all that depends on your setup, doesn't it? You know, if you haven't got much room at home or wherever you do your painting, you know, it might not be very convenient to have like 10 sets of brushes around, one set to mix with, one set to do this and that with, you know, so you have to work with what you've got. But your brushes will last longer if you don't mix. I'm not talking about mixing small amounts of paint, but the main bulk of the paint, if you can mix that with a different brush, then all the better. Treat them with kindness. You can see I'm just applying, I've got a first coat down there. I'm just applying a second coat just quickly, and then I'm going to take up some of this burnt sienna colour again, and I'm just going to add some areas of pigment just to lift and also to almost suggest a highlight on these antlers. So just round there like that into this area, because it looks like there's some light being caught on that section. Down into there. You can see how nicely that works. It tends to be a bit red on this bit, but on the other bit it's a bit white, so I'm just going to add a little bit of white into the red mix, and then I'm going to put that on this section here like that, and then in there there's a bit of white in there. Okay, so you can see it building up slowly, and really all you need to do is continue with adding colour. This bit here is just literally putting in patches of colour. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this on time lapse so you can see it speeding up. I'm literally just going to fill in the rest of the colours, put in the patterns, and then I will speak to you again at the end about how to finish.